I'm Orlando Patterson, professor of sociology at Harvard. I'm a historical and comparative sociologist. I work on the history of slavery and freedom, but I also work on contemporary societies. One of my more recent work was on the problems of black youth. The perspective I bring to this problem is to understand how cultural and social factors interact. People usually don't like to talk about the cultural aspect of disadvantage. They seem to think that's a conservative approach. I'm a social democrat, and I see no problem in looking at how culture is influential as long as one realizes that culture interacts with structural factors such as the economic ones, poverty, and so on. And this is what I did in the cultural matrix. I looked at disadvantaged neighborhoods, and what I found was that there's no single culture in black neighborhoods. Black neighborhoods are rich with a variety of different cultures. There's middle-class black culture in black neighborhood. There's a working-class black culture. There's, of course, the culture of the disconnected, the so-called street culture. There's hip-hop culture. So we look at all of these, and we look at the ways in which each one interacts with the broader economic environment to generate outcomes, some of which are quite positive. Black Americans have generated a rich cultural tradition which is an integral part of the broader American culture, and a lot of this comes out of the working class neighborhoods. But there are also problematic cultures such as the street culture, which has got to be understood if one is to understand the problems that African Americans face in the educational system. Those problems are partly structural in the sense of bad schools, in the sense of not getting the right kind of support necessary, but they're also partly cultural, and the two interact to produce these outcomes. And if we're going to solve these problems, we have to address both. I also point out that when looking at culture, we don't just look at the culture of African Americans. We look at the culture of the middle class people who influence African Americans. For example, assumptions about education come from elites who, in fact, bring their own values and influence how schools are run and the kind of priorities which schools have. So culture is a complex issue which must always be seen, and that's the central point of the cultural matrix. It must always be seen, not in isolation, but how it interacts with structural factors to produce particular outcomes. Let me give another example about child-rearing practices. Now, it's often the case that single moms in the inner cities know how to bring up a child the right way. They have the right values, they have the right knowledge, and they're very committed to bringing up their kids in the right way. But they have to deal with a world in which they may have to two jobs, and they come home dog-tired. They do not have the time to pass on that knowledge, to bring up their kids the way they know they should. And this is a good example of how having the cultural values and so on may not be enough, because you need to have the right kind of social and economic environment. And if you have to work two jobs to survive, you do not have the time necessary to be the parent you'd like to be. So that's a kind of interaction which we observe and analyze throughout the work in trying to explain the outcomes of disadvantaged black youth in the inner cities.